So I did another video on digital medicine, reviewing an article in Nature Biotechnology on why they believe that digital medicine might be a solution to the chronic disease epidemic in the United States. So I thought maybe I should do another definition video that actually explains what digital medicine is, how it's being used, and some of the more specifics, because I didn't really get into what digital medicine was. And I actually, in preparing for this article, I realized a lot of these definitions, though they seem a little bit annoying, I think are really important for the policy implications. I'll get into a little bit at the end on how we might integrate digital medicine into our health system. Really relies on getting it approved by the FDA and also getting reimbursed, whether that's through private insurers, but particularly important for Medicaid and Medicare services. So I hope you find this article interesting. I'm going to get into some of the challenges, go into some of the examples of current digital medicine companies and the applications, and also some of the challenges as digital medicine starts to integrate itself into our health system. So what is digital medicine? I'm going to take a look at these definitions here. So digital medicine describes a field concerned with the use of technologies as tools for measurement and intervention in the service of human health. And now digital therapeutics is a subset of digital medicine, and it provides evidence-based therapeutic interventions that are driven by high-quality software programs to treat, manage, or prevent a disease or condition. And there's some great websites, I'll put the links in the description, where you can find the Digital Therapeutics Alliance or the Digital Medicine Association that describes these techniques in detail. They have a lot of good resources on their website. And now I'll get into some more specifics about how we begin to think about digital therapeutics. For example, there's product claims. So what you say that your therapeutic is able to do actually requires a certain level of evidence in order to be approved by the FDA or conducted in clinical trials or implemented in the public. So for example, wellness and support apps. So these are things like fitness trackers, telehealth platforms, lifestyle apps. Because those are really geared towards improving your life without targeting a specific diagnosis, you can really release those. These are apps that you can download the App Store that really don't have a lot of regulation. These are things that might claim to, improve your wellness, improve your health, something general that doesn't really require assessment by the FDA. Then there's diagnostics and monitoring. So this requires clinical evidence. These are things like digital diagnostics or digital biomarkers. So say, for example, some features based on your texting or how often you interact with your phone or charge your phone. Any of these features are digital biomarkers that might indicate whether or not a person is having a relapse on their medical condition or is being disconnected with the healthcare system. Anything that might prompt the medical system to engage with an individual based on a digital biomarker, that kind of thing to be integrated with our health system would require some clinical evidence. And then the third product claim would be actually being a therapeutic intervention to treat a diagnosis. So these would be something like an app that claims to treat your anxiety or treat your depression. So this requires both clinical evidence, whether that's through a randomized controlled trial, and real-world outcomes. So the FDA would like to see some evidence that this is actually going to be a product that has therapeutic relevance. Another primer on definitions is the product categories. So this is slightly different because this is deciding whether or not something requires a prescription, so requires a physician to actually sign off or clinician to sign off on you getting that prescription, and hopefully it could potentially be covered by insurance. So if it's to treat a disease, then that would be a prescription digital therapeutic. If it's to manage a disease, so for example, certain side effects that happen, in patients that are cancer survivors, they might just need a little bit of support on staying active and helping them with their lifestyle aspects that isn't directly treating their medical condition. That might not need approval or prescription. But if it is something to manage your COPD by reminding you to take particular doses of a medication, that might be something that requires a prescription. And then finally, the least restrictions required is anything to improve a health function. So this is something like your mobility or your wellness, things that don't require a diagnosis, but are used for a particular person or patient population. And now, what is digital therapeutics currently being used for? So I look at the National Clinical Trials Registry to just get a sense of how many trials are going on right now that are using digital therapeutics. And you can see there's over 1,300 different trials that have been registered in various stages of recruitment or that have already been done. And that just shows this is, even though it's a relatively new field, there's a lot of research that's being done right now. And you'll see it for a variety of different medical conditions, type 2 diabetes, COPD, a lot of psychiatric conditions, including PTSD, depression, anxiety, insomnia. You'll notice a lot of these conditions that rely on behavior change being a large component of how you manage or treat this condition really lends itself well to potentially being helped with digital therapeutics. Now, I want to get into a couple examples of some companies that are really the front runners and leaders in the digital therapeutic space. I'll actually start with Pear Therapeutics as an example. So they were one of the first companies to actually get a digital therapeutic approved by the FDA. They're a really high profile, very successful front runner, and they actually recently went bankrupt. So I won't actually get into that detail now. I might actually do some more research onto the ins and outs of what happened with that process. But I think it's interesting that once you develop the application and even get it approved by FDA, there are significant barriers to getting this implemented in the healthcare system. And then there's a company called Orexo, who develops both pharma and digital therapeutics. And they had a recent interview that I look at Stat News article that talked that one of the leaders at this company believes that the field just isn't ready. They think the demand is there, but they're citing issues with the current healthcare reimbursement model as to why they haven't been able to be successful with their digital therapeutics arm. However, they have a pharma arm, so maybe they're less likely to actually go under or go out of business because they're still making a profit off of their pharmacology stuff. But it's just something interesting to take note of. Another thought about Orexo is people have thought that maybe there's just not enough evidence. We need to see that these digital therapeutics really work. So we'll talk about two of the products from Orexo. The first is Vorvida. It's a 6-month online program for alcohol management using cognitive behavioral therapy, and it has been used in a randomized controlled trial of over 600 patients. And the second is Deprexis, which is a 3-month online program as a standalone or adjunctive to other therapies for patients with depression, and it has been used in over 12 randomized controlled trials with over 2,800 patients. So really, they have accomplished the evidence piece. They've shown efficacy in a huge number of patients, but their Q2 revenues of 2023 is less than 0.1 million of their local currency. So this is, less than $500,000 in the United States. Meanwhile, the costs in that same time frame cost $2.7 million. So they've actually seen a decline in their sales for their digital therapeutics arms with Vorvida and Deprexis over the last year. And they really are up against what they think is an issue with the reimbursement model. Now, before I get into the reimbursement challenge, I'm going to talk about another company, Acheive Therapeutics, which is really widely recognized as another leader in the digital medicine space. They have EndeavorRx, which is FDA approved for childhood ADHD. And they also just created Endeavor OTC, so an over-the-counter version based on the same technology for anybody over the age of 18 without a prescription to use their app to treat their ADHD symptoms. I think it's a super interesting concept because especially in children, the current standard of care is to put them on, say, methylphenidate, so a stimulant, which has, it's an appetite suppressant. I've seen kids in my primary care rotations that are very thin, they're very active, say they're very hyperactive. You really want to hesitate to put someone on a stimulant that might even further decrease their appetite and thus limit their growth. So it's really an intriguing area to actually have a digital medicine that wouldn't have those side effects in that age group. So I really like this example from Acheive. So like I said, the OTC version does not require prescription, but I'll talk about the prescription piece because that I think fits into some of the bigger issues that these companies are facing. Acheive actually has been able to increase their therapeutics prescriptions from a little over 1,800 in the fourth quarter of 2022 to now 2,372 in the first quarter of 2023. So they've actually had an increase in number of prescriptions, which requires, getting physicians to be aware of this, getting physicians to prescribe it, and also just the awareness in general of pervading these health systems, that getting parents and children on board to actually try something new. And interestingly though, if you look into the financial reports that acheive releases publicly, you can see that 94% of the prescriptions that were given in this time were self-paid. So these were privately paid by presumably the patients and their families. And only 1% was reimbursed by the healthcare system. And so that probably was because there's not currently Medicare or Medicaid reimbursement for digital therapeutics. This probably was a private insurance reimbursement that was happening. But that's almost nothing is being reimbursed. So it's really an interesting problem that digital therapeutics is facing. Now I'll just talk a little bit about overcoming the reimbursement problem. So as I mentioned, there's not currently any pathway to get digital therapeutics to be reimbursed by Medicare and Medicaid services, but there is an act that is being lobbied at Congress that would expand Medicare and Medicaid coverage to digital therapeutics. And this is where I think all of these definitions and these specifics really come into play, because if you want to enact this into law, then you need to be specific and you need to have different therapeutics and different levels of evidence so that you can streamline this approval process. Right now, it's kind of all over the place. You can make a lot of different claims, so having the streamlined definition and certain levels of evidence for different product claims is really important for getting this into the current medical system. And so the majority of reimbursement that has been achieved has really been on case-by-case contracts with individual payers, largely the employee-sponsored insurance plans. I talk about that a little bit in the other video that I posted on digital therapeutics, so you can check that out. And for these case-by-case contracts, it's thought that perhaps you're going to be able to get a little bit more creative, so potential rebates and discounts based on real-world evidence. So are digital therapeutics working, and how are employers and employees saving costs by using them? And the final thing that I'll say is that what the current thought is that most commercial payers will be more quickly able to adopt the ability to reimburse for short-term indications, because it's easier to compare a digital therapeutic for, say, a 4-week time frame with another standard 4-week time frame therapy, such as for insomnia or sedative hypnotics, for example. But digital therapeutics for chronic disease, let's say, for example, a patient might be using this for years before they really see a true benefit, is going to be a lot harder to convince the FDA, for example, or different payers that it's worth the investment. So there might be some new creative payment models in order to figure this out, but it's a really interesting space, and I'll be watching closely the act that's being lobbied in Congress right now that would expand Medicare and Medicaid coverage. And so that is it. If there are any components about digital therapeutics that you're interested in, or any companies that you're looking at, I would love to hear what you are interested in, and maybe we can have a conversation in the comments, or I can make another video covering different topics on digital therapeutics. Thanks for watching.